Good afternoon and welcome everyone to today's webinar. I'm Anne Livingston and I'm the chair of the Expert Reference Group for the Queensland Government funded Community Care Smart Assistive Technology Collaborative. I will be the moderator for today's webinar on open data and community care. This webinar is part of a series being facilitated by Community Resourcing for the Community Care Smart Assistive Technology Collaborative. As many of you would know, these webinars have been designed from feedback and requests that we have received through the collaborative. Our webinars try to bring together local, national and international perspectives in research and development, as well as focusing on the deployment of smart assistive technology in community care and critical issues like data. Many of you know us, but Community Resourcing has extensive international linkages and we've been very fortunate to work with many international projects and research entities. For those of you who have attended previous sessions know that we've been funded by the Department of Communities, Child Safety and Disability Services as part of the Queensland Government to bring together an online platform for community care providers who are interested in collaborating on issues and practices related to new and emerging smart and assistive technology. The site is importantly accessible and free to register. So if you already haven't formally registered, I'd encourage you to do so. We've been running the collaborative now for over 2 years. And we've been very fortunate to have a number of resources and presenters. But it's important to note that neither Community Resourcing or the Department of Communities, Child Safety and Disability Services of the Queensland Government are promoting or endorsing any particular product, research entity or organisation. Rather, our webinars are designed to inform viewers of various examples of technologies in development and or in deployment and to discuss critical issues in their use. As attendees at today's session and in the interests of recording, you'll note that we have muted your microphones. But don't let that stop you asking questions and we encourage you to ask those questions. These can be added to the question pane on the dashboard to the right of your screen. There will be an opportunity at the end of the session to have these answered. I've noted at previous sessions that we've been inundated with questions, so please try to post your questions early to ensure that we can cover them in today's session. Today's session is really one that's at the forefront of our thinking in the collaborative, and many projects are wanting to explore open data more critically in their practice. In today's session, you'll be given an introduction on open data and its potential application in community care. And we're really thankful and appreciative that we've been able to have the Open Data Institute CEO, Marie Anstead, to present to us today. By way of introduction, Marie is the founding CEO of Open Data Institute Queensland. The mission of the organisation is to connect, equip and inspire people around the world to innovate with data. This is a great initiative and ODI is in its 3rd year and is being recognised not just within Queensland but internationally and nationally as a leader in bringing business, industry, academia and government together to utilise government data as a strategic resource. Marie's career began in the legal profession as a partner in a Tier 1 national law firm. 10 years later, she co-founded a software startup which achieved great success and was a recipient of multiple awards of excellence in innovation. Marie also holds a number of complementary roles, including that of Queensland's Small Business Champion, and one of 6 civil society representatives on the interim working group overseeing the implementation of Australia's first National Open Government Action Plan, as well as spending her time between various state and local government open data advisory groups. Her past industry representative roles include past chair of the Technology Council of the Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Queensland, and past chair of the Queensland branch of the Australian Information Industry Association of Queensland. In 2002, Marie received the prestigious Women in Technology ICT Outstanding Achievement Award, which recognises the achievements of outstanding women within Queensland's ICT industries, and was delighted in 2005 to be the patron of Tech Girls Are Superheroes. With that great introduction, it's my pleasure to hand over to Marie for today's presentation.
Thanks very much, Anne. I'm delighted to be here. Can you see my screen now in front of you?
Beautifully, thank you.
Excellent. Okay, so we're going to have a bit of a chat today around open data, but before we do that, we'll have a little more introduction around the organisation itself, what we do, and Anne's introduced our mission our global mission as you know, that connector, the organisation to help equip and inspire people around the world to innovate with data, and that's exactly what we're about. We're a not-for-profit organisation. There's our global mission there. A little bit about us. I've got on the screen now all of the organisations that got behind the Open Data Institute here in Australia and helped us in our formative stage. We've got a mix of universities and private sector and public sector there, with Queensland Government coming on board in July last year as our open data partner. We've got some local councils as well, and businesses large and small who all, for various reasons, are behind the organisation and a very important part of the open data community to help either their customers or in their own service delivery innovate using public data. So let's have a chat about this topic. So what is open data and why do I need to know about it? These are the areas we're going to have a little look at this afternoon, starting with what is data itself. We're going right back to sort of, as Anne said, this was a good introduction, so we're going right back to basics. What's data? What's open data? What makes data open? What's that difference between data and open data? And that's a really good thing to understand. Why do we need to open data? Why does public sector organisations in particular need to think about making its data available for reuse and repurposing for others to innovate, or themselves in fact to innovate? So we'll talk a little bit about that. And how can we use open data to create new value in our own lives, at home, at work and in our business, to do things differently and think about data differently and how we might be able to understand challenges differently. So let's have a look at data, and these are some slides I've taken from a learning module that's available for anyone. There's 13 of them as different themes or different learning topics for anyone to reuse and view at any time. They work through different topics. This one's a good introductory one. It's module 1. So what I've done is I've grabbed some of those concepts to work through with you guys today, and then I'll show you where you can find those so you can access more information later on. But this thing is information triangle or knowledge triangle. You'll see there in that white box is something that people speak about quite frequently. It's the building blocks to sort of achieve wisdom, I suppose, at the end of the day, or insight at the top of the the pinnacle of the triangle. So down the bottom there, we've got all these bits and pieces, and it's the raw material that data is. It might be just facts and figures. It might be latitude and longitude of a place. It could be a date. All sorts of things. Even an image can be data. And then on that, we start to build a bit of context. So slide, sorry, I'm pressing on the wrong button. I was pressing on the blue button for the slide, and that's a static button. That wasn't going to work for us. So the next layer in this sort of insight triangle is information. So what we do with these raw building blocks and these raw pieces of data is we wrap a bit of context around that. So we might be thinking about planning a holiday, for example, and we think about the sorts of things we're interested in doing, or our budget we might start with. So we start with some raw data around what we can afford, how many people are going to come, what sort of minimum stuff we need to deal with. Then you start wrapping some context around it. What do we like? What do we want to do? What do we want to make sure we see? And building some context in, you start to create a bit more of a clear picture about what you're trying to understand in where you're going to go. Then there's this additional element on the top, which is the knowledge, and that's the thing that gives you answers questions and enables you to better understand something. So with all of this, you've got the raw data sort of feeding into your problem, and then you wrap context around it, and it gets you the answers that you're looking for. What train do we need to get from Rome to up to Venice? How are we going to organise ourselves from there, and all of that sort of stuff in terms of planning a holiday. So that's what we're talking about when we speak about data. It can be any sorts of raw building blocks of information. And this is one of the lovely things I like about the online learning modules that are available, is it actually has these little quizzes at the end, so you can just double check and respond to the questions that it asks you to make sure you've understood. So the question in this case we've just talked about is, what is data? Data can be information posted on the web, numbers, words, maps and photos, or it's the raw material of information and knowledge. And hopefully we've gathered through already in the conversation that we're talking about the third one, raw material of knowledge and of information and knowledge. So what's open data? So we've talked about data. What's open data? So the only difference between data and open data is that it has been given a special permission on it for anyone to access, use and share. And you can see that up at the top of the screen there, that's been put in bold. Access, use and share. And that's really easy to remember, because guess what? AUS is our short version of Australia. Access, use and share. And that's the three key elements that make data open. It's got that permission on it, and it becomes usable as open data when it's put into a common machine readable format. And what that means is, for example, a PDF is a document that's been locked into a certain format that is not machine readable. A computer program can't break into that PDF and extract the data that it wants out of it. So yes, it's technically able to be published as open data, but it's not going to be terribly helpful to you if you're trying to use a software program or a data analytics program to help you grab those bits and pieces and combine it with other data sets. Something like an Excel spreadsheet that you're probably familiar with and use all the time, that's the sort of thing that's a little bit more that's certainly machine readable. It's not in a open format, however, so extra gold stars are awarded if it's in an open format like CSV. Now let's keep moving. So we've talked about what's data, what is open data, and what makes it open. So this is again taken from one of those online learning modules, which runs through some questions at the end. Selectively released for a fee, we haven't talked about that, so that mustn't be the answer. Free of restrictions for its use, or restricted in its use. It's the middle one, free of restrictions for its use. To be truly open, there cannot be any caveats on how you use that data, or how, or that you might not be able to use it, for example, for a business purpose or commercial purpose to make money out of. Now, obviously, one of the most important questions we come to in many of our conversations around open data is, why are we doing all of this? Why are we bothering? Is this an important thing to do? What happens when we open and share our data for others to reuse and repurpose, is you don't know what kind of amazing additional things people will be able to do with that data. So if there's no, and we'll come to the data spectrum in a moment, but if there's no reason not to share that data, if it doesn't contain any private information or sensitive information about an individual, or specifically on that's a sensitive location or culturally sensitive information, if there's no reason, it's a bus timetable, for example, there is no reason that that couldn't be published openly for anybody to use, so that they might have developed a computer program that just takes that bus timetable and converts it into something that makes it easier for other people to understand how to get around a foreign city, for example. So there's lots of benefits for publishing data we'll come to in a moment, but this is again a questionnaire from the online learning module. Why do we open our data? We unlock social, environmental and economic benefits, give access to other data sets, make governments accountable. Yes, it's kind of a little bit of all of the above, but it's that unlocking of that unexpected value and unanticipated value that's really the benefit. So there's lots of examples around the world already of the economic benefits, lots of examples around the world of environmental benefits and social benefits. The social benefits are probably some of the easiest already that we've seen, and I'll come to a couple of those for you. So here in Australia, we've tried to sort of come up with what's the value of unlocking this, and if the Australian government, the state governments and local governments contribute the data that they've already collected as their business as usual, things that they just do as part of their service delivery to us as citizens, and convert that by putting an open license on it, what sort of things could happen? So there's been an economic study that a couple of years ago that estimated that there's $25 billion locked up in that value if we just shared it and made it available for others to use every year and year on year. So they're big numbers, and it's impossible to sort of really contemplate. But there's some good examples where I'll show you in a second where you can really sort of see some, actually no, I'll talk about it now. So the 58 to 1 ROI for open data Transport for London. Just super quickly, what happened in London is a great story. So the Transport for London is their public sector, a public transport operator. They had a bit of a, I wouldn't say it was a public relations issue, it was more of a communication issue. They were getting a lot of complaints. People were failing to understand the timetable properly. There was miscommunications occurring. So it was a communication issue at the end of the day, like a lot of challenges. So it's quite universal, this one. They decided that instead of trying to improve the way of communicating with their customers, they just published all of their open data to see what the market could create with it. And in the first year, they had 362 different apps that had been developed by startups and all sorts of people out in the community to interpret that data and dish up services to the community to help them make better decisions about how they move about the city. And those apps were touching an estimated 4 million people in the UK every day. So then they engaged an economist to come in and say, well, what's the value of all of this? How do you quantify the impact that this is having economically and socially and environmentally on London? So they've done, the economics were a little easier to quantify, the pure economics of, saving ticket pricing or making more money through selling more tickets. But then there was this, intangible of how do you value the cost of saving time? How do you value being able to be home an hour early in an afternoon and actually tuck your kids in before they're already gone to bed and you're home late because you've missed the train? So they endeavoured to quantify all of that, and that's the kind of number that they came up with, that 58 to 1 return on investment that they got back as a city based on the cost of making those data sets available to the public. We've had a few examples here in Australia where researchers in particular are using public open data to have an environmental impact. There's been a bit of fun that happened in the UK using toilet data to create some sheet music there, which was played by a brass band. So there's all sorts of interesting things, and I'll come to some very nice local examples in a minute. So that's what we mean by open data. Now let's have a look at what the difference is between some of these other concepts. And you've probably heard people speaking about closed data, shared data, even big data. So this is what we call the data spectrum. And it's a really useful way of thinking about data. And it comes up a lot in conversations that we have. So what we've got here is examples of data and all data belongs somewhere on this spectrum, whether it be in the closed area, shared in the middle somewhere, or open. So some of the examples that you might find as closed would be, as they've said in the example there, national security data. You can understand that that might be closed. Data that's incredibly sensitive about ourselves, for example, our financial data. We might not choose to share that. Well, we share it, I guess, in a way. We fill in a tax return and send that to the tax office, and they share it. But you know, loan applications and things like that, that's a good example of shared data, because you might fill in an application for a mortgage for your house, and at the bottom there'll be some terms and conditions that you have to tick the box for in order to get the money. And in there, you'll notice that they are sharing your data with other service providers who suddenly give you a phone call and say, hey, have you thought about self-managed super funds? And you wonder how that happened. That's why. It's because we're agreeing to share certain parts of our data with other service providers in order to give us benefits. So that's an example of data that exists in the shared data. You've had to give permission to do that. It hasn't just happened without your permission, but sometimes we give away our permissions without even thinking about it. Then you move across the spectrum into areas like you know, a bus timetable, as I said before, or it might be the city plan is another good example for a local council. So Brisbane City recently released its entire city planning data as public open data. Yes, it was already made available. You could look it up on the website, but you couldn't actually interrogate that through a computer software program to be able to create something new using that data set. Things like maps of toilets, where are ramps for boats, all those sorts of things. Yes, you might be able to see it if you Google it and find it on their website. But in order to truly innovate using that data, it has to be made available to you under an open license so that you've got permission to use it, and in a machine-readable format, as I was explaining before about the difference between a CSV or a PDF and a Excel spreadsheet. The nuances between the permissions from closed, shared and open are all in the art of the license. And so the most open type of license you can get in Australia is the one we call a Creative Commons CC BY or by attribution license, which simply means that you can use that for it's as open as you possibly can get. The only catch is you've got to give, or you've got to attribute, the original source of that data. So if you're using data from the Department of Transport and Main Roads to build an app, and you're using data from Department of Communities and Department of, I don't know, Brisbane City Council overlaid on top of that, as long as you just put that in your acknowledgements somewhere in the material about your solution that you've built, then that's fine. But at the end of the day, data is useless unless you're doing something with it. So we talked before about that triangle where we've got data at the bottom. That's just all of these bits and pieces that in isolation are incredibly useless unless we start to wrap some context and derive some knowledge and information out of it. So what we've got here is a couple of examples of some really important, meaningful things that people have done with data. And I like this one because I'm a bit of a Game of Thrones nut. So someone with clearly too much time on their hands has created a visualization of all of the Game of Thrones data. And this is actually interactive, and that link is live. You can jump in and have a look at it. You can actually drill down into all of the different characters, look at the number of fatalities they've caused, look at all sorts of different stats on their involvement throughout the plot. And it's a bit of fun. So the other one I like to use as an example to give people a bit of an idea and sort of spark a bit of imagination is this one. This is an American one that uses data from a whole bunch of different dog breeders, councils, all sorts of different sources to create a tool to help you find the most appropriate breed of dog to suit you and your family and your living situation. So that's another one that's a bit of fun that anyone can use to try and to help themselves make these very important decisions in life. One of the other examples I wanted to show you was right2go.com. Now this is a cool one. because I think it's solving quite a handy problem for certainly people who live in Brisbane. It's only available with Brisbane City Plan at the moment. So Brisbane City, as I mentioned before, released their city plan. They made it available for anyone to access, use and share. Right to Go grabbed it and turned it into an information system for people who are trying to figure out if they need to get approval to build an extra room on their house, do they need to get approval to knock their house down, do they need to get approval for all sorts of things that exist in the planning scheme and in the city plan. Now, trying to get on and Google that and sort of navigate your way through, it's probably going to require you to end up going either sitting down with someone at council or ringing up a town planner and getting the answer to this. This is a cool way of sort of initially sparking some of those, putting those inquiries into the app, and it will tell you what you can and can't do and what sort of permissions you're going to require. So it's pretty handy if you're just having a bit of a look around and exploring some ideas on what you might want to do with your property. The second interesting thing it does, and this is more a shared data thing than an open data thing, is it actually then connects you with suppliers in your local area, and you've got the option to share some data about what you're proposing to do with your property, and then the app will actually go away and filter through and contact these people and present them back to you, and you can then get in touch with them, and they can you can choose to let them help you with your development. This is probably a bit more of a relevant one for you guys, My Community Directory. This one's an interesting one because it takes closed, shared and open data together and uses it to deliver services to help people navigate proximate disability support, recreational facilities. So it takes data from, say, a council about where its parks are, where its soccer clubs are, where its bowls clubs, all those kinds of things, but it also overlays it with data from state government about what disability services are in an area, or what, and then some shared data from private health care professionals as well. And then it's got a mapping tool. So if you are quite immobile but need to get to something that you can only walk to, or you need to be able to cab to but only within a certain range because it's outside of your budget or whatever, then it gives you a ways to look for things that are going to fit in the circle that you need to search in. So that's another example of open data changing the way people access information. So what I've got here, because you're probably thinking to yourself, God, where do you find all of this data? There's a couple of places. There's a lot of places, to be honest, and it can be pretty confusing. So what we've done is on our website, we've put together a list of all of the publishers who produce public open data. Right through all of the different councils across the country, and there's many of them, state governments, and sometimes state governments put their data in a couple of places. Queensland government do that. They've got geospatial data that they put in one place, and then they've got their other data that they put on the data.qld.gov.au. So there's lots of different places where public organisations, public sector bodies will publish their data. But data.gov.au is the federal government one, and that's actually a good one to start with because it does do some federation with other portals that are around. A lot of local councils, for example, are accessible through that one place. Eventually, Nirvana might look like being able to use it like Google. It doesn't work that way now. You can't just Google open data and it'll bring up sort of all these portals for you. You have to actually know a little bit where to look at the moment. But if you go to that space on our website, that's a really handy. And every time there's a hack event or a Gov hack or City hack or whatever you name it, that web page on our website gets hammered by people that use that as a guide to be able to find data. So if you click on that later, and I can, if we get time, I can bring up our website and sort of show you how to navigate some of these things. You can use those as, once you're in the portal, you can use them to search with terms that you're looking for. So that does work in a way a little bit like Google, but you have to wait till you get into the portal before you can start to do that. And that will show you where to find the license, for example. So we've been talking about Creative Commons CC BY. Down the bottom of that slide, there's a Creative Commons share alike license, which is slightly more restricted, but I can show you where there's a really great online learning module that'll walk you through all the different licenses. So if you're wanting to learn a bit more about that. Speaking of wanting to learn a little bit more, this is another great tool that the ODI have developed. This one wasn't built by us. This was our parent organisation, even though we're not quite linked like that. It was sort of loosely a franchise, I guess. The guys in London that founded the ODI, this is their creation, and it's absolutely brilliant. What it is each of these different little hexagons is a different sort of skill, and all of the training that we offer helps people navigate their way around which is a good course for them by highlighting which of these skills that it covers. At the introductory level, you've got obviously introducing open data, which is largely what we've covered in this session today, and creating value is sort of we've only just touched on, but you start there at what we call the explorer level, which is just dipping your toe in the water and sort of getting a bit familiar with what some of these things mean. And cleaning data is another handy thing for people who use data and work with data regularly in order to help them make more use of public open data, because quite often at the moment what is released is just what the department or what the council's using, and they haven't done anything fancy with it, so it might not be actually all that usable, and you might have to spend a bit of time because it might be full of formatting errors and things that it's done the purpose for what they need it for, but not quite for what you use it for. So you might need to spend a bit of time cleaning that data, and that's a very common scenario that we find with people using public open data. Then you move into the strategy or practitioner. So strategy is everybody on the left of the honeycomb of little hexagons there, and practitioner or the green and the pink sort of colours on that side. And what that means is if you're in your role, you don't roll up your sleeves and work with data yourself, then you're probably going to be a strategist, and that means you're a decision maker in the organisation, or you might be charged with making some policy or implementing policy. That's the sort of skills that you might be looking to gain. But if you're a person who actually does data analytics, or you gather data, or you create data, then you might be looking towards that right side of the honeycomb as it splits down into the green and pink. And then pioneer are the people that have really gained advanced expertise, and they might be doing quite complex data science, some of those pink ones down the bottom, or leading their organisation through cultural change and innovation, so being the grey ones in the middle there. It's a bit disappearing in the screen there, but that's on our website, all of the learning options, and that's where you'll also find those online modules that we've had a little quick glimpse into today. We're about to change our website over the next couple of weeks, because we're rebranding from ODI Queensland into ODI Australian Network, and with that's coming a major overhaul of where we put things on our website. So we're going to make that honeycomb a lot easier to find and use, and we're going to make our courses a lot easier to figure out as well, because at the moment we've got courses running in Sydney, Canberra, Melbourne and Brisbane. Most of our courses are in Brisbane. We've got lots and lots happening here, but we're getting a bit of feedback from people that's really tricky to kind of work out which city and where and what kind of course is right for them. So we're giving it a massive overhaul and make it really easy for people. But all of the functionality that I've just spoken about, the list of data portals and the online learning and all the rest of it, none of that's going away. It'll still be there. It'll just be easier to find. That's all the content I had to run through, but I'm really happy to take questions or jump into the website and sort of give you a bit of an idea on where to find things, if that would be of interest.
That's great, Marie. Thank you. Really comprehensive coverage of the opportunities, I guess, for community care providers to use data more effectively and to find data. I've already got a number of questions. I'm just wondering, would you like to go to your website first, or you're happy for me to go with some questions and then we'll share the screen?
Well, I guess we can just work through the questions. If we need to jump into the website, I can. Whatever works.
Okay, that would be great. I've got several already that have come through, and I'd asked others if they have some questions to post them right now on the question pane. It's filling up very quickly. I had a question from Georgie, who's very interested in some of your learning options and wondered if they're linked to any accredited university courses.
Well, that's a good question. There's not really a lot around that's being offered through tertiary education. So what we've done is we've partnered with Griffith University and QUT, and they are delivering some of our training, our open data related training content. For example, Friday this week we've got QUT's Digital Media Research Centre. They're running some analytics courses, an analytics course for social media, but it isn't part of their standard curriculum, and it's not a course they would typically offer inside of their existing offerings. So the short answer is no, we don't actually, if you do an ODI course, you don't get credit, say, for example, to apply in a tertiary scenario. But what we are doing is we're creating digital badging with all of those different hexagons in the honeycomb, and each of those will be, so if you do a course that covers 3 of those things, you earn those digital badges basically, and you can use those either in your CV or on LinkedIn or whatever to differentiate that you've actually attained those skills. There's nothing quite else out there that does that. So we're kind of pioneering it a little bit and just experimenting, but that's been based on feedback we actually got out of New Zealand. So we're running some training in New Zealand, and they said, look, we want to be able to demonstrate to our employers and future employers that we've done this. It won't help you in getting a credit, as I say, towards something else at university, but at least there's some ability to recognise skills that you're investing in developing.
And Marie, I think you've then really covered Georgie's question, second part of her question. I'm really having problems, she said, trying to find something that will fulfil my want to get some qualifications in this area, but can't find them in any existing university courses. So I think you've answered the question. It's a new emerging area that perhaps the tertiary training sector needs to do a lot of more work to catch up on.
Yeah, I think data literacy is one of those sleeping things. It's an opportunity that I don't think we've really thought about too well as something we've got to get a lot better at. So yeah, no, I sympathise, Georgie. There's not a lot around at the moment, but yeah, watch this space. It won't be long.
Okay, I've got another question from Frank, Marie. He's very passionate about the scrutinising of data that's available in his organisation, and they're using that data that they're now collecting through some mainstream technology that they use to drive their operation, and they're getting to a stage where they're very keen to use that to drive productivity and effectiveness for their organisation. And he's been trying to overlay that data with some data, that might have been available from the Commonwealth or the state in the areas of funding, but he's actually been frustrated by the lack of data he can get access to. I guess he's trying to appropriately market, position his service using the data and benchmarking how his organisation is performing. Marie, are there any clues as to how you can influence data to be published or to be available?
Oh, we have a brilliant opportunity coming up, but it's only really state focused. You can, just in more broadly, I'll talk about before I give you the example of what's coming up for input into the state government. Usually each organisation who's currently publishing on their portal have a function where you can request data sets. I don't know if you've tried that and whether you've come up against a brick wall, but that's one option. The other option is to just get in touch with I mean, you probably already tried this, but get in touch with the custodians and explain what it is you're looking for, and if it's available, hopefully. We're going through an evolutionary process, and there's a lot of cultural change that's got to happen before we get to this space where people are a lot more cooperative. But most custodians are trying hard to create this culture whereby if people are asking for data, then that's a good thing, and if they can, they'll try to make that available, because it's tricky to try and guess what people in the community want out of their data. Things that they themselves are using all the time might not necessarily be of much value out in the community. So what the Queensland Government are doing is they've actually engaged us to help ask that question and find out from people the areas of or data sets that would have maximum value if they were to release it, because it costs money and time and effort and resources to publish this stuff. It doesn't just happen by magic. So they're aware of the fact that if they spent or prioritise their effort in trying to publish things that are going to be most in demand, then that's a good thing. So we're having a workshop on I think it's the 15th of June. We're about to put out a newsletter announcing the dates for this, although I'm thinking we maybe, depending on how many numbers we're trying to get, it might be limited. But anyway, it's an opportunity for key economic sectors that the Queensland Government have identified to come in and give them their wish list, and then we're going to work through the wish list with the data custodians and come up with a minimum of 10 new data sets that have to be published by the end of sort of June, July. So that's one way of doing it. But there's no framework that exists anywhere in the world that says if you publish anything that relates to these 10 topics, for example, then that's going to have most bang for buck out in the community. There's not really any meaningful guide like that that's been done yet.
Okay, well that's a great opportunity, and we'll certainly publicise that for you through our collaborative. I know that from the questions coming through, there's some key interest in particular data sets. Okay. So people would be willing, I think, to collaborate on maybe defining that ahead of the 15th. There are several people in the collaborative who are very interested in using mining data that they've got within organisations on a regular basis. And that consortium, I've just got some people who put their hands up to do a bit of work in preparation for the 15th. And I guess that goes to Janet's question. Janet, thank you for posting that question around some Commonwealth data sets in our sector. Marie, one of the biggest funding rounds was the aged care approvals round, where service providers received approval and a number of approvals to provide services, and that was published, freely published. Now the process is that eligibility for approvals goes with a client, so that data is currently not freely available. I actually know where it is and get it regularly, but not publicly available. And Janet was asking that particular specific question about that data set. I know that may be putting you on the spot, but are you aware of any sources of Commonwealth data that might pertain to that question?
Not specifically, but I do know that there's a very considerable commitment being made in the federal government around the Open Government Partnership, that they're addressing certain sectors to try and get more data out into.
And Janet, look, I do know that the Aged Care Industry Technology Council, which I chair, the National Home Care Group, has an interface directly with the government, and is being provided that data regularly, particularly as in terms of our lobbying for feedback around the data of the new reforms and the changes to the gateway. Other data sets we're seeking and sourcing are those related to assessment. So what people are getting assessed for, which will indicate things like eligibility for particular levels of care and the geographical areas in which the person resides. And My Aged Care, I guess, is a huge source of data now, a centralised depository of data that was not there previously when we had a more fragmented system. So those data sources are being reported on quite regularly if you're involved in government consultations. And the other source of truth we tend to use as a bit of a Bible of Commonwealth services is the report into productivity. The Productivity Commission's report into government services, and that report's released each year in January and has some entertaining reading at times around the differences between states and territories and where some of the emphasis of government policy and funding has been made. So, Janet, I'd be happy to talk to you offline if that's something of interest to you and point you to the direction, but you also might like to contribute to freeing those sources up via the workshop and other activities that are occurring. I again remind people to post their questions, and Imogen and I are just reviewing those questions as we speak. And Marie, a number of questions have come through about privacy. Given that we're dealing with very vulnerable populations, those who freely give lots of their data but sometimes don't realise the value of the data. And so would you like to comment on issues like privacy legislation, the free use of data, and any barriers or legal or ethical that you like to comment on?
Yeah, sure. So with the commitment, there was about roughly 7 commitments that the Australian government developed as part of the Open Government Partnership. One of those commitments was to build confidence and trust in data sharing through managing privacy better. So the the Australian Office of Information Commission has released, or is working on releasing, I think is more the case, some guidelines for publishers or public sector organisations on what the rules are about sharing and opening data. It's also featured quite significantly in the work that the Productivity Commission did in its inquiry into data availability and use, and it came up with this concept of individuals being more kind of like a broker of their own data, and sort of shifting to a model that was kind of empowering you as an individual to know what data was kept about yourself by different departments, and then be able to choose how if you shared that for certain purposes and gave permissions to do that. So that's a model that's being explored right now through the work of the Productivity Commission. So there's a lot to be done, but what we're trying to do at the moment with anyone that's sort of challenged by making publishing decisions around privacy is we've got this certificate process, open data certificate thing that you can earn for data sets. It helps publishers sort of work through, tick boxes on sort of how they've dealt with certain things, and give consumers a lot more confidence about the process that's gone on in order to publish that data set. And privacy is a really important part of that, so that the publisher has had to look at a adhere to whatever their guidelines are internally in their organisation and make sure that they've addressed the question of privacy before the data becomes public. And interestingly, there's been a whole bunch of questions that were posed recently by, I think, a study in New South Wales about the confidence of people, no, federally it was, but the confidence in people that they're willing to share their data, or whether they are confident that their private data is being managed well, and that confidence is growing. So I think that there's, you know, the fact that we're at least making sure that certainly data that's being made published as open data doesn't breach privacy in the first place. There isn't anything in there that or re-identification of data is a problem. I don't know if that's come up as a question we've already got in our list, but re-identification is something that's only going to get more and more of an issue as tools become cleverer about how you can combine different data sets to sort of really rebuild a picture. And so there's been legislation debated. I don't know if you've heard about that. It was a little while ago now, about maybe making it a criminal offence to re-identify data that's been appropriately de-identified. So it's, yeah, I guess the short answer now is the best we can do is build confidence in our custodians so that they know what they can and can't publish and shouldn't publish. That's in accordance with their own guidelines, and that their own guidelines have been developed with the relevant privacy commissioner in their state, or adhere to these new frameworks that are being built by the federal government.
Thanks, Marie. Probably only got time for 2 more questions. There's a group of providers in the collaborative who are working on using data to drive a some smart transport projects. And they were interested in your 58-to-1 return on investment from the data from our London transport study, and would like to find out a little bit more about that, or explore what they've done. Is that something we can take up with you offline? And perhaps if you wanted to make any comments to that request rather than a question.
Yeah, sure. So we can certainly help you. There's a case study that was published, quite a detailed case study that went through the process, followed. It was quite a candid, actually, interview from the CIO of the Transport for London. As to how the 58-to-1 was calculated, I believe the ODI have got some of that documented on their website, so I'll grab that and put that with the case study, and we might just send that through to you, and you can share that with the anything else about today's webinar.
That would be great. One final question, which is culminating a few questions in the site, about asking about concrete examples where data is being used, accessed and used effectively in the community care sector. Now, I guess you gave one example of that, Marie, being the community...
My community directory, yeah.
My community directory, and we're aware of the work Brenton's doing in that respect. And there's some interesting ways of using data about a lot of things that people don't often put thought to, and but also for planners to see the distribution of social care and services and facilities throughout Queensland and indeed Australia. But I'm just wondering whether, in the interest of the couple of minutes we've got left, is that for those who have questioned some concrete examples, we know of a number of service providers who are doing some fantastic analysing data to improve their service delivery. Obviously, most of them are doing it to get a competitive edge, and a lot of them are investing significant amounts of money in making sure that they are gaining access to robust data, but also being able to, or acquiring resources to actually analyse that data. And we also are aware of some really good research projects in this area, and so we're wondering whether, Marie, we might convene another webinar that just probably shows a couple of case examples and maybe ask you to come back and share it.
Yeah, that sounds fine with me. The challenge in getting some really exciting examples of use of this public open data is still that we're finding that there's data that's being published that's requiring a fair bit of effort before you can consume it, or there's data missing, which makes really good examples, a bit hard to find. But just on the comment you made before about the service providers that are analysing the data to be able to look for, say, areas where they're not getting coverage of certain services for the population. One of the things that's happening with that My Community Directory example is that they're providing the data back to the local councils on what people are looking for in the area as well. So it's a two-way kind of service, in that it's helping people connect with things that they want to connect with that's close to them in their area, but it's also collecting that data and giving that back to the local councils to say, look, this is what's hot in your area and this is what people are needing. So it's quite interesting to see it sort of come back and have that double sort of extra benefit. But yeah, look, I'm happy to come up with some sort of have a community-specific community service type talk.
Great, Marie, that's fantastic. I'll just remind everyone before we finish for today, if you're not formally registered, you won't automatically get notification of all our events and the forums that are happening, etc. So in front of your screen there now is where you register. It's a free service and you don't get a set of steak knives, but you'll get plenty of good information coming through. Just a couple of webinars. Our next webinar is this week, this Friday, and we've got some colleagues from Western Australia talking about their MyTech project, which is connecting people to emerging assistive technology. I would also like to remind people that we've got a number of activities on at the moment, including on the 5th of June, we're hosting the Australian Living Lab Symposium, which is being held by the Australian Living Labs Innovation Network, and it's being held at QUT here in Brisbane. We're also very pleased to partner with several other organisations and entities to bring together a community care, business transformation and innovation conference, again at QUT. And both of these are going to be linked with a Advanced Queensland Digital Champions activity, which is a free networking activity on the 5th of June at the State Library, where we're going to explore the Digital Futures Lab, but also look at showcasing some of the research that's happening within the context of community care reform and living labs, with a presenter showing some of his research around dementia care and the use of very fantastic technologies that I won't divulge. So Imogen's going to send some invites to everyone who's registered for today's session. But I would like to finish today by thanking our presenter. Marie, your presentation's really been thought-provoking, and I guess the use of data and the really interrogation of data in the sector is something fairly new and may not be on the agenda, highly on the agenda of every service provider. But we know through the collaborative that there is a growing area of interest in people who want to explore the data sets that they've got more and get access to government's data sets to either improve their quality of their service, their productivity, to fill up gaps, or just to do a better job. So the material you've provided today has been exceptional, and thank you for sharing that. We hope it's the first of many intersections that we have with ODI, and are able to reap the benefits of what is really becoming a very important international source of information. So thank you again, Marie.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's been
I'd also like to thank the Community Care Smart Assistive Technology Collaborative Project team, led by Liz Dodd, who's been in the background today in today's presentation, and Imogen Guinea, who's been doing the technical support today. Our work is guided by an expert reference group, and I'd also like to acknowledge their voluntary contribution to the development and establishment of the collaborative. Alongside the Queensland Government, our collaborative would not have been possible without the support of the Queensland Government through the Department of Communities, Child Safety and Disability Services. So again, thanks Marie, and thanks everyone who's attended today's session. If you need any more information, please don't hesitate to ask the team, and their team's group email is there, sat@communityresourcing.com.au. Thanks everyone for listening today, and thank you for your participation. Thanks for your participation.